I want your opinion. Is the Jaguar XK, the E-Type, the most beautiful car of all time? Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution. You know, normally I'm at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix, but this month, well, we're on a road trip. We're visiting the California Auto Museum here in Sacramento. This place has more than 130 cars under roof, and well, they're all pretty interesting. It's hard to imagine that any of them are more beautiful than this 1963 Jaguar E-Type convertible. You know, when this car debuted in 1961, it really sent a shockwave through the sports car world. Aerodynamically sleek and incredibly sexy at the same time. In fact, according to automotive legend, even Enzo Ferrari called this the most beautiful car in the world. Now, to be completely honest, I don't know that I really believe that Enzo would ever have said that out loud, but he definitely might have thought of it. But before I get into this particular Jaguar's history, please take a moment to like and subscribe. The likes are very important. And in the comments below, let me know what I got right. Let me know what I got wrong. There's always something I got wrong. And answer the question of the day, is this the most beautiful sports car ever designed? All right, let's tell the story of how this spectacular automobile came to be. Let's start with a little Jaguar history. You know, the company started in 1922 as the Swallow Sidecar Company, building motorcycle sidecars before moving into the automotive coach building world. By the late 1920s, the company was building stylish bodies for cars for manufacturers like Austin and Standard, and they were quickly gaining a reputation for combining attractive design and competitive pricing. In 1935, the SS Jaguar name was introduced on a new line of cars, and after World War II, well, Jaguar was building complete vehicles rather than just bodies. The late 1940s saw a major technical step forward with the introduction of the XK engine. It was a dual overhead cam, inline six, that debuted with the Jaguar XK120 in 1948, and it established Jaguar as a serious performance manufacturer. In 1951, they used that engine in the Jaguar C-Type, and C, by the way, stood for competition. It won Le Mans the first time out, and a few years later, Jaguar brought out the D-Type, and that won Le Mans 3 times in a row, from 55 to 57. It was both elegant and fast, with advanced aerodynamics and lightweight engineering. But it was just a race car. For its next chapter, Jaguar wanted to take everything it had learned with the D-Type to build the ultimate street machine. Jaguar turned to the same man who had designed the C and the D-Type, Malcolm Sayer. He was an aircraft engineer who simply applied aviation principles to automotive design. The result was a body that was both visually stunning and aerodynamically functional for its day. When the E-Type debuted at the 1961 Geneva Motor Show, it created an immediate impact. Demand right off the bat outstripped Jaguar's ability to build the E-Type. Back then, the E-Type cost more than an MG or an Austin Healey, but it was a lot less than a Ferrari. And when you factor in the beauty and the speed, 150 miles an hour, this was a great deal. All right, here's a question for you. Is this a Jaguar E-Type or is it an XKE? A lot of the Jaguar purists always get angry when you call it an XKE. When it was first introduced, if you look at the factory literature, it calls it an E-Type. But if you read articles from 1961 on, doesn't matter whether it was in England or in the United States, it was always referred to as the Jaguar XKE. In fact, there were even people working within the company who were calling it the XKE. Remember, XK was the type of engine. E-Type was the idea that it was following after the D-Type. But officially, it's the E-Type, but everybody just calls it the Jaguar XKE. All right, let's walk around and take a look at the styling on our 1963 Jaguar E-Type. I should say the spectacular styling on this E-Type. You know, back then they used to talk about the fact that, once again, this had been aviation inspired by that Malcolm Sayer design, and the fact that every surface on this had a particular function, a particular reason that existed, whether it was reducing drag or improving airflow. And of course, it's got that massive long hood with a 6-cylinder engine underneath. We'll take a look at some point in time. Early on, what we call the Series 1 cars have a covered headlight. For the Series 2 cars, midway through 1967, because of federal regulations, they had to get rid of this cover, and now the headlights are exposed and, of course, not as clean aerodynamically. Speaking of aerodynamics, when we talk about this car, For its day, the drag coefficient was actually pretty good. For today, well, we really wouldn't think of it as that spectacular. But once again, for 1961, when this came out, it was very, very sleek. It did have some front-end lift the faster you went, but that was something that they were able to work around. But it was just beautifully designed in terms of both its style and its aerodynamics. And remember, this was a 150-mile-an-hour car, and they were able to achieve that two ways, both by the aerodynamic qualities of the body, as well as the fact that it has a small frontal area, so it's not a big, huge car punching through the wind. And of course, it doesn't have a great big grille, which a lot of cars would have had back in the late 50s and early 60s. It's got a stressed steel body, monocoque construction. It's got a front subframe with square section tubing, and of course, has independent front suspension as well as independent rear suspension and inboard brakes. Now, those inboard brakes became very popular with hot rodders for a long time. They were used in a variety of Jaguars, and see an awful lot of hot rods that use them because they're both very attractive and very efficient with, keeping the heavier portions of the brakes inside. So it's actually really nicely done. Of course, you could get a coupe or a convertible. The coupe, of course, is the sleeker version of this. You could also get a convertible that had a fiberglass hard top, not nearly as aerodynamically smooth. Overall, 96-inch wheelbase, about a 50-inch track, so it was relatively narrow. And even the back is very smooth and clean aerodynamically. Now, that once again, as time goes along, they'll realize they could make it even more so. But for its day, this was a great-looking car with a lot of aerodynamic advantages that other cars in its day did not have. While I think the coupe version of this car is absolutely amazingly beautiful, I have to tell you, getting in or out of this car, the convertible, is definitely a lot easier than the coupe. Having said that, it's still not that easy. There's a very tall sill that I'm going to have to get my leg all the way over and then squeeze inside. Once I am inside, I tell you what, this interior, the cockpit, just fits me like a glove. It's just comfortable. I mean, once again, the D-Type was purely a race car. This was designed to be a grand touring car. I mean, after all, it was bigger and more expensive than a lot of the other British sports cars that were available in its day. You've got beautiful Smith gauges laid out across the dashboard. I love these toggle switches. These toggle switches would last for a long time until eventually federal regulations required them to move to rocker-style switches. I guess they thought these were dangerous if you were to run into them. Love the center console, this aluminum going all the way back, the stick shift prominently located, the parking brake. Now, there were not a lot of changes from the time this car was introduced in 1961 to 1963, at least not the things you could see. But there were some refinements. For example, the seats were actually more comfortable. They had a little more padding by 1963 than they had when they were introduced in 1961. But the best thing about this car, the absolute greatest thing, is when you're sitting in here, hands on this wooden steering wheel in this case, looking out at those gauges, what you see is that long, beautiful hood stretched out in front of you. In fact, you can't even see the absolute front of this. It's just a beautiful, beautiful design. Now, I will point out that in 1963, they did one significant thing to make it easier to get into and out of this car and to give drivers a little bit more legroom. 1963, they lowered the floor plans just a little bit. They recessed them just very slightly so they have a little bit more room. Now, some people consider the earlier ones, the flat floor pans, more desirable, more valuable because they're early cars. But if you're trying to get into or out of a Jaguar, the reality is you're going to like the fact that it's got these lower floor pans and not the flat pans. Under the hood of this 1963 E-Type is the legendary 3.8-liter inline-six engine. It's part of the XK engine family that was introduced back in 1948. It's got these great dual overhead camshaft, a design that was advanced for its time. Also has an aluminum cylinder head and a cast iron block. It even has hemispherical combustion chambers, very advanced for its day. This engine had already proven itself at Le Mans back in the 1950s, so it was really ready for street use in the 60s. The engine has 3 SU carburetors, see them lined up right there. It makes about 265 horsepower. The result was top speeds around 150 miles an hour, which would make it among the fastest production cars in the world back in 1961 when it was introduced. Power delivery was smooth and progressive with strong mid-range torque that really made the car usable in everyday driving as well as in high-speed touring. And not only did it have great performance, but it just looks so darn cool. I mean, these long polished cam covers and the distinctive intake over there, the air intake layout, it was visually striking when the long hood was up. Now in 1964, they would punch this engine out to 4.2 liters. It would have about the same horsepower, but more torque. And that XK engine had a long life. It stayed in production in various forms into the 1980s and would really help define the character of Jaguar's performance cars for decades. Now, in addition to the bigger engine that came along in 1964, there were also some refinements for the cooling system and the interior ergonomics. What Jaguar learned after those first few years was that drivers loved driving the E-Type, but they wanted a little more comfort. Now in '66, Jag created a 2+2 model that stretched the wheelbase 9 inches and had a much bigger, of course, some say uglier, roofline. By the late 1960s and into the 70s, the E-Type began to evolve more noticeably as regulations and market expectations changed. Jaguar introduced the Series 2 officially in '68, which brought out larger bumpers, open headlights, and a revised cooling system, all designed to meet U.S. safety and emission requirements. And while those changes made the car more compliant and practical, an awful lot of Jaguar purists felt the E-Type was starting to lose its soul. In '71, they introduced the V12 Series 3. That lasted until '74, when E-Type production finally came to an end. By then, tell you what, it was big and it was complicated. But back in 1963, when this car comes out, the E-Type was at its peak, sleek and fast, and making everyone around you jealous. So what do you think? Is this the most beautiful sports car of all time?